Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be doing a book review of John Gwynne's The Shadow of the Gods. This book is not currently out yet. It is releasing, I believe, on the 4th of May in the US and the 6th of May over here in the UK. I got an electronic ARC from over at NetGalley, so thanks for that. The book should be ready to purchase about a fortnight after this video goes live. First things I want to say about this book is how good is this cover art? Like, seriously, this is one of the most beautiful books I've seen in a long time. Even if I didn't know who John Gwynne was, even if I wasn't a fan of him before, if I had seen this book cover in a bookshop, I would have purchased it based on the cover alone. It is incredible. With that said, let's get into the actual book. John Gwynne has written 7 previous books, all of them based in the same world. The first 4 books are part of the Faithful and the Fallen series. That is followed by a trilogy of books in the series called Of Blood and Bone. So all of those are based in a world called the Banished Lands. The Banished Lands is inspired primarily by Celtic culture and folklore, with a little bit of Roman inspiration thrown in as well. The Shadow of the Gods, however, is the first book of a brand new series in a brand new world. So this world is called Vigrid, or the Battle Plane. It is Norse inspired, and it is based in a post-Ragnarok Norse style world. So centuries in the past, there was the God War, the gods fought each other and died, and we are in a world that is dealing with the aftermath of that. So in this world, there are no longer these gods present, but there are people referred to as the Tainted. These are humans who have some of the gods' bloods running in their veins, so they are partially descended from one of the gods. That gives them some special abilities and means that they have different skill sets related to whichever god they are descended from. These Tainted are hated by the humans. They are hunted, they are killed or enslaved and used essentially as slaves for their abilities. And this is the legacy of the gods that is left, and humanity hates them. As well as that, this world also has creatures known as Vaesen. These come in all different shapes and sizes. There are little reptilian things that like eating human teeth, all the way up to huge trolls. So this is, for those of you who've read the Banished Lands saga, this here in the Bloodsworn saga is much higher fantasy. The amount of magic we see is increased greatly. In The Shadow of the Gods, we follow 3 main perspective characters. For those who know Gwynne's work, this is quite a low number for him. I believe in Malice we followed 7, and at the beginning of Blood and Bone, Time of Dread, I believe we followed 4 point of view characters. Here we only have 3. And I think this book actually is really helped by that. So it is very, although it's not a short book, it does feel quite streamlined. It feels nice and concise where it needs to be, and it really pushes us through the plot well. So our 3 main characters, we follow Orca, who is a mother who is fighting to find something that's been taken from her. We are following Varg, who is a man who is enslaved and is trying to find the killer of his murdered sister. And then there is Elvar, who is a young woman who's part of a Viking-esque warband who is trying to win her battle fame and glory and honour by doing great deeds with her company. The first thing I want to say here is that John Gwynne's character work is on point. These characters are super well realised, they're really well drawn. I felt very much engaged with them from very early on in this book. Their motivations were understandable, their decisions and choices and actions all made sense, and they were very relatable. In particular, I loved Orca. She reminded me of my favourite character from The Faithful and the Fallen, who was also one of my favourite characters in fantasy. I can see Orca really jumping ahead of him in terms of my love for a John Gwynne character. She is so understandable and so relatable. She is very complex. She's clearly got a lot going on under the surface that we don't know about yet, and I just find her very, very interesting. Similarly, Varg is a very interesting character. I enjoyed his arc a lot. His arc is very different to Orca's. He has motivation to get moving straight from the off. I do really enjoy the way that John Gwynne intertwined these three characters and their three storylines. In some ways they felt very unrelated throughout the vast majority of this book. They only converge slightly and only at the end. But for keen-eyed readers who are really paying attention, you can start to piece together how different characters we are introduced to and meet in the different storylines relate to other storylines that are happening. You start to see how places in the world they go are related, and you start to see how the plot is related as well. And I think there's real value here in this book for people who enjoy taking their time and really puzzling things out. And there are other areas of this book that I think that relates to as well, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Other than the characters, another thing I adored about this book was the world building. Vigrid, the battle plane where the Bloodsworn saga is set, he feels much more fantastical. There is a lot more magic and mythological and fantastical elements that are much more at the forefront than we got in the Banished Lands, particularly in The Faithful and the Fallen. I really enjoy this idea of the Tainted and the fact that they have these abilities but are hated by humanity. And I think the Vaesen that we see are a very interesting take on mythological, fantastical creatures. I like that they have a really wide range. We only see a few different types in this book, but you can see there's a vast range of Vaesen, from these little small reptilian things even up to massive trolls. And I think that's it feels very different. And I think the way that John Gwynne builds this world is really interesting. He avoids info dumps at all costs. The characters we are following know this world. The people they interact with know this world. There is no reason for them to stand and talk about and explain everything about this world and these creatures. And so as such, we don't see that. We have to pick things up via context. We get little hints here and there as people talk about things, but we have to put that together. We have to piece that together and try and understand this world from the little bits, the little nuggets of information that get left for us. And I found that really interesting and really rewarding. The other thing I would say about this world building is that geographically, it is much more varied than we have seen from John Gwynne's works in the past. Because we are in this world post-Ragnarok, a couple of centuries after this god war, actually the bodies of the gods are littered around the battle plane, and we do see a few of them, and the impact that they have on human civilization, on the different places where humans live and build their towns and their homes, is really interesting. And it means that the different places we visit have very different feels to them. And I really appreciated that about Vigrid. It made it a much more interesting place. It helped us differentiate towns from each other, and it helped give a little bit of extra spice to the different cultures of where people lived, as there were such different geological and geographical settings that they grew up in, and towns and places that they lived, and I found that really interesting. On to John Gwynne's prose in this book. As always, it was brisk. We didn't get bogged down in too much description. I think he does a good job of keeping the pace up. There's always something happening or something being said. It does mean that if you really like those heavily detailed descriptions of what people are wearing, what it looks like, what they are eating, if you want Robert Jordan details, this is not what you get from John Gwynne. He is much more about the motivation, the emotions, the actions and the speech of the people we're following than what they look like and what the world around them looks like. As always, the combat and action scenes are amazingly well written. They are really well realised. I never feel that I am lost in them, that I don't know what's happening, and they never feel like action for the sake of action. There's always something on the line. There's always some form of stakes, whether that be stakes about winning the battle and what you receive from that, what you gain from that, or whether it's about emotional, personal development as stakes for why people are fighting and the result and the stakes that you get from that. I think it's so easy to just see books where authors sprinkle in action scenes to add a bit of interest, whereas here they all feel really important and relevant, and it's not just you can skip the scene and just see who wins at the end to progress the plot. That never feels like something you want to or you could do in this book. This is, like many of John Gwynne's other works, quite bloody. We do get characters that die. I don't think it surprised me as much as it did when I first read The Faithful and the Fallen. I was expecting for characters to die, I was expecting for fights to cost lives, and that feels very realistic to me. Like, so often in fantasy we get people who get into a huge battle and none of their friends die. They're outnumbered massively, and yet a couple of people who we don't really care about died and nothing else matters. Whereas in this book, combat costs lives, people die, and plot armor is not a thing, or it's much less a thing than we see in many other fantasy series, and I really, really appreciate that. As you might imagine, The Shadow of the Gods is not a perfect book. I do have a few little nitpicks where I think this could have been a little bit better. So my first problem is that when we first got introduced to Elvar, a young female character who is a part of this warband, I didn't feel particularly connected to her. We got introduced to her maybe in chapter 7 or so. We'd had a good few chapters with Varg and Orca already, and I was really getting to know them. I was starting to understand their characters, their personalities, their motivations, and I was starting to feel a real connection with them. And then we got our first Elvar chapter. And just with what's happening in her storyline, I didn't feel a massive connection with her immediately. I will say that as the story progresses, that really did build. We started to get a little bit more of her backstory and her background, and I really did appreciate her. I understood her and I understood her motivations, and that was a real positive. However, that did take until maybe halfway through the book. So to me, those first few chapters with Elvar, I was reading them really wanting to be back with Orca or Varg. But as I said, that did progress and improve as we got towards the middle of the book. Another thing I will say here is to do with the world building I was talking about and the lack of info dumps. And that will be that if you don't like being lost in a story, if you need to know what everything means and everything that's going on, and that word has to be explained to you, you don't want to be in the dark, this might be a bit tricky for you because we don't get those info dumps. We don't get given all the information at the start and all the information we need to understand all the words that are said. And as such, it can be frustrating if you're someone who doesn't like that journey of discovery, who doesn't like being in the dark. As I said earlier, for me personally, this was actually a positive. I really enjoyed that journey, but do know if that's something you struggle with, you might struggle with it here in this book. Overall, for me, this book was an incredible read. As far as I'm concerned, John Gwynne cannot write these books fast enough. Please get them out soon because I want to continue in this series. I want to continue with these characters that I know and love and really understand. For me, it is an easy 5-star read, no doubt whatsoever. I think this is the best initial book in a series that John Gwynne has written. I think it is better than Malice, and I think it is better than A Time of Dread. And I just absolutely adore the world he's created here, and I cannot wait to get back to these characters. If you like this video, click the like button. If you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you soon.